Let's do the thing here. It's well past 7:30. Meeting has come to order. Everybody settle down. As people come on board, I'm sure they'll catch up with us. We have again, kind of a limited meeting. We've got Mr. Lin going to talk about our telescope making group. Rick, have any comments on the newsletter? Been getting good participation.
Oh, the usual, nothing.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody even reads the dang thing.
Well, I do. Of course, I want to see if you've got my picture there. But yeah, there's been not a whole lot of contribution in talks and what have you. Did appreciate Tom Blakis's last week. That was, oh man, what a dream internship job up there at Lowell with that 24-inch, that would, or 42-inch, 24 or 42. Now I'm senior moment.
42.
Okay, 42. Can't remember many things. Next month's meeting is probably still going to be Zoomed, and the thing about it is that it may not. We have the potential we could possibly meet at a clubhouse near 32nd Street and the State Route 51 at one of our members' communities clubhouse. Said plenty of room. The issue is going to be probably needing to have a good Wi-Fi connection so that we can Zoom should we need to. But I would like the members to let us know, will you be willing to meet in person, or do you really want to yet? As well as maybe at that particular clubhouse, if possible, if it would work out, we'd have to let you know later. Or at Grand Canyon University, they are now allowing entities to sign up. They do have Wi-Fi there so that we could still Zoom for our presenters who are away from our neighborhood. So put that in mind. Email either Rick or myself, or put comments in the chat area. If you are a SAC member and would be attending, want to attend, or just keep this Zoom for a few more months, considering the Delta variant. So past that, still no word on when the solar array is going to be built out there at the Saloma Emergency Airfield. So anybody wants to sneak out there when the weather gets nicer, you may see me there. But so far, there's just not been any progress, no surveying. I haven't seen Doodly Squad out there being done. So it's actually kind of an inactive area. Of course, the antenna site is still a viable location, and that will probably be the one we get permitted. BLM has already said that they're okay with that. The only hesitancy we have is that I want to make another run out there pretty soon to see what these storms have done. And next week's storm, another inch of rain, no telling what that's going to do out in that vicinity. God forbid we should be in the Gulf Coast this weekend, but I'm not sure what that road condition is, or whether you would have to go out towards the airfield and then loop back around the back route, because that would be a much better route to just be a longer trip. So unless somebody can come up with another better place, Gordon Rosner and I have been talking about this, and we just don't have any ideas for better places. And he admits he's never been to the antenna site, so he really can't say really whether he thinks it'll work or not. I kind of think it's about our best chance. There's plenty of room away from the actual antenna site where people do hang out on that kind of a slope. Moving out away into some of those flat areas, it's not nearly as nice as, of course, the runways. But anyway, we're still open for suggestions. So we would be more than willing to check them out if we could find, hopefully, state or federal land where we don't have to pay an individual fee per entity. So that's about all I had, other than for those of you, the Maricopa County lighting ordinance for the electronic billboards. Look at the forum site, if you will, and you can see some really good comments that have been made. There'll be another public meeting on that. Maricopa County will make it virtual so we can tune in, listen to it, and make comments. So it's just light pollution happening, more of the same. Haven't seen anything out at 72 East exit on I-10, any construction of the truck stop out there that they've proposed. But so nothing's happening anywhere. And don't I know, nothing's happening in my world either. Buying toys, just can't get to use them. So with that, let's just jump in and let Paul take over the screen and talk to us about what the old grind is.
You're going to have to remind me how to do that.
Okay, go down to the bottom or top where it's where your share screen is.
Yeah.
You should be able to, if you have already opened PowerPoint or some photos, you should be able to click right on them.
Okay.
Ah, you got her. Now go down and get the little, let's see, go up to the, where is this little booger?
So I guess I gotta go.
Yeah, there should
Hold
be,
on.
yeah, there should be a little movie screen.
I'm looking for it. I'm using a different slide presenter here.
Ah, okay.
Since I don't have PowerPoint on this computer and my other computer is bit to dust. Where's the little screen?
Just maximize your screen. See if that works.
Yeah, go up to the right.
It's already maximized.
Okay, double click on the slide, maybe.
Yeah.
What's that red thing on the bottom?
The red thing on the bottom.
Red icon next to the size of the
That didn't work.
bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
See that little red thing right in the middle?
No, there isn't any.
Okay.
This is LibreOffice.
Go up to the very top, and there should be the icon slide show.
Oh,
Try that.
it's
Off on the
what,
left.
slide what? Oh, slideshow?
Try that. And
There you go. No,
Start slideshow. Uh-oh. What's
Okay,
happening?
just click again.
I don't want that one.
Just click.
Okay,
There you go.
all right. Okay, well, Tom asked me to say something about the telescope making group. And I realized later that we don't meet during July and August. So I put together some slides, maybe a couple of them you've seen, and some more recent stuff. So here we go. We have 2 mirror projects. We haven't done any mirrors before, mostly repairs to telescopes. And I'm assuming you can hear me, right?
Yes, just fine.
Oh, okay. One is a 6-inch f5. We call it a grab and go scope. That's kind of a club project, and it can be any club actually, because we've had people from EBAC here. And the other is my own project, which is a 6-inch f4 mirror. It turns out to be a 3.6 f3.6 hyperbolic astrograph. So I'll explain a little bit about that. Here's some examples. This is an f6 6-inch. So the one we're working on would be 6 inches shorter than that. And this is a Pierre Schwarr mount, which isn't too bad, but it's a little bit shaky. And this is an idea for my 6-inch astrograph. Down here is my own, what I call my micro jack screw focuser. It's motor driven and it's got 100 turns per inch screws lifting it. And the filter wheel and the camera, which is a 2x2 inch Kodak 16803 camera, which of course is not available anymore. The 6-inch astrograph has a doublet corrector near the focus, and it has a hyperbolic mirror to compensate for the spherical aberration of the corrector lens. It had some polishing problems, and I fixed those, and I'm currently parabolizing and overcorrecting it, so I might call that hyperbolizing it. Back to our progress over the months. Here's Lynn Blackburn rough grinding that 6-inch. And this is my grinding table, which I'll say a little more about. And this is my spherometer here, which we've used to measure the curvatures. Here's Michael Pop pre-grinding in April. And I haven't seen him for a little while. I love his shirt. It says, "In my defense, I was left unsupervised."
Here's Michael.
Yeah. And here's Tom Mosden and his crew. He brought some students from ASU. In front here is Nivedita and her boyfriend, I'm not sure his name, something like Caitanya. And there's Rick Rotrammel taking notes as he usually does. Now, these knees and legs belong to Barbara Mosden, and we'll see a picture of her later. But Tom, as I commented before, at the beginning of the pandemic, he stopped seeing his barber. And now I think he's not going to see the barber anymore. He's more professorial now that he's Dr. Tom Mosden, the astrophysicist. And so we go on, and there's Nivedita doing fine grinding. She continued all the way through 6-micron fine grinding. And there's Rick taking more notes. And I'm showing an example of my grinding machine, grinding and polishing. There's Barbara and Nivedita. And this thing has 2 motors. One down at the bottom here is for rotation, and there's even more pulleys up above. They're variable speed motors, and I have little volume control, speed controls at the edge of the table. This motor is for the cross feed, and there's a variable cam type arrangement here. What else? Whoops. This may be the end. This is the last slide. Okay, and you can see pieces of my workshop here. So any questions, I'll be glad to answer. There was one question last time, in fact. It was, how long does it take to make a mirror? Does it take months? And I said, well, it takes about a month. Actually, there's 2 people I've heard of that have made a decent quality mirror in 1 day or less. One was Pierre Schwar, who had passed away some years ago and was a member of SAC. Another is, I think it's Reverend William Allison from back in the 1920s and 30s, who made a large number of mirrors and was quite an astronomer, even though he started out as an ordained minister. So I guess I'd like to know if there's any more questions.
I haven't seen anything come up on the Q&A board or the chat board either.
Okay.
Are you going to be holding it next month, your group?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I will. Normally we would have held it this month before the SAC meeting, but again, usually we don't in August. Yeah, we will hold one probably the Tuesday before the SAC meeting.
Okie doke. Last call for questions for Paul. Oye, oye. Okie doke. Well, I tell you what, this is kind of like one of those rather quick meetings, since we don't have a lot of member participation on that front. I will mention one more time that coming up, it's only 4 months till Christmas. Remember, get me something nice. I'm your president. You got to keep in my good side or I'll put you on a committee. Oh, wait a second. We don't have committees, do we? Oh, I'll nominate you for something. I'll nominate you for president. That's it. Make you sit here. Otherwise, I tell you what, we're just going to jump right in to our guest presenter, and I will read his bio because it's too long and too impressive for me to try to remember at my seniorness. Our speaker is Dr. Samuel Lawrence from the NASA Johnson Space Center. He is a planetary scientist in the Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division at the NASA Johnson Space Center, where he is the center's lead lunar exploration scientist and a member of the Science, Technology, and Utilization Office of the Human Exploration and Operations Missions Directorate. I mean, do you have a fold-out business card for all of that? Because I mean, that's a mouthful. And he's working to ensure the success of the Artemis program, which is what he's going to talk about tonight. He was a co-chair of the Artemis 3 Science Definition Team, which defined the objectives for the first crewed mission. Not crude as in most of us are rather crude, but crude as in having real people, not dogs, get to the lunar surface in the last 60 years. And I just can't imagine it's been that long. That just makes me feel really old, because I remember when it happened. I was watching it on TV. I took pictures in black and white off the TV screen of the launch, and that was just really cool. Dr. Lawrence's research focuses on investigating the composition, origin, and evolution of planetary surfaces, and he frequently performs applied exploration science to enable U.S. human spaceflight goals. Now, remember, David Dillmore got him as a speaker. We're going to be talking about things like geology, and you all know that my undergrad is geology, and I love geology. So I didn't have a whole lot to do with this, although it's right where David knows I like. So a member of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter LRO camera science team, Dr. Lawrence has been heavily involved in LRO spacecraft development, testing operations, and science since 2007. Prior to entering federal service, Dr. Lawrence was a member of the research facility in the School of Earth and Space Exploration at ASU, yay, where I got my master's. From 2007 to 2016, Dr. Lawrence is an influential leader in the planetary science community and has served on numerous advisory panels. He is presently the Emeritus Chair of the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group and served as the LEAG Chair from 2018 to 2020. I guess they have bylaws too, and they couldn't keep him there for longer than the 2 years. Dr. Lawrence was awarded the 2017 NASA Survey Susan Mahan-Niebuhr Award for Outstanding Early Career Contributions to Exploration Science. So with no more to do, I'd like everybody to sit back and enjoy Dr. Lawrence's presentation. Dr. Lawrence, it's all yours, buddy.
All right, well, thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you guys. I guess your friend David approached my good friend Mark Robinson, who's a professor at ASU. And Mark is busy delivering a camera to Korea. He's got an instrument on board the Korean Pathfinder Lunar Orbiter spacecraft, which is getting ready for launch with our allies in South Korea. So Mark asked me if I could do this, and I was happy to oblige. One of the problems with the pandemic is that we don't get out much. And I used to do dozens of outreach talks every year. As a NASA scientist, I've got the best job in the world. And it's just so much fun to share all the exciting work that we're doing and have been doing with all of you, the people that we work for. So I'm just delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And I'll just get started. I'm going to talk about some of the exciting work, the really exciting work that we are doing right now for all of you. So we recently, 2 years ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission, the first human landing on another world. And I think for many people, this is kind of what you remember, the dusty image of Armstrong stepping off the lunar module onto the Sea of Tranquility. I think for most Americans, that's kind of what they remember. The dusty, the grainy images, so the astronauts just wandered around, picked up some rocks, and job done. We're done. This is the moon as it really is. A stunning world full of wonder and opportunity. Opportunity for science, opportunity for commerce, opportunity for exploration. It's just waiting for us to explore it. You hear why the moon, we hear a lot about Mars. Why do we still care about the moon? We've been there, we've done that. Well, our moon is useful. It is a place with vast resources, enabling us to go anywhere and do anything we want to do in the solar system. Our moon is interesting. It's a place to make profound scientific advances about the Earth, our solar system, the universe around us, and our place within it. And our moon is attainable. It is a place where currently existing knowledge will let us live and let us work. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of Apollo and the evolution of exploration. So this is Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon during Apollo 11. Now notice a couple of things. The first thing you should notice is Buzz is standing very stiffly. And he's not carrying any tools. He's not carrying any equipment. We only stayed on the moon for about 2.5 hours. We walked on the moon 2.5 hours during that first mission. The astronauts collected 26 or so kilograms of lunar rocks in that 2-hour time frame. They took some pictures. They collected some rock samples, which were phenomenally useful. And then they went home. They only went about 100 feet or so away from the lunar module. Fast forward just a couple of years later. Oops, slide over. Okay, and so this is brought home really here by this picture we took at ASU in 2011 with our Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera system. We dropped the spacecraft down to about 25 kilometers over the surface. We barnstormed the moon, and we got these images of the Statio Tranquillitatis, which is what it was named after the mission, the Tranquility Base, in high resolution. And so you can actually see the individual footpads of the lunar module. You can see the experimental station left on the moon by the Apollo astronauts. You can see Neil Armstrong's footprints as he went out to Little West Crater. You can see the camera that recorded it all during the first human steps onto another world. Fast forward just a couple of years to 1971, and we had a lunar rover, a 4-wheel drive vehicle on the surface. This is Jim Irwin on the Apollo 15 mission. That's Mount Hadley in the background. This is one of the original scans of the original flight films that we collected at ASU as part of a project to digitize and record all the Apollo photographs for posterity. This is the lunar rover. Notice though they have bags, they have tools, they have specialized equipment. Notice that Jim is moving his arms and he's very active. He has a much more natural stance because we'd improved the spacesuits. We'd given the lunar rover, we had geology tools. And that's really driven home by this. Remember, Armstrong only got about 50 meters, 100 feet away from the lunar module. Here on the Apollo 15 mission, they drove about a total of 33 kilometers away from the LEM. They had numerous EVA stops. They collected hundreds of kilograms of samples. It was astonishing. And that really drives home the point that we stopped going to the moon right at the point where we had gotten really good at it. And this is one of my favorite pictures taken on the Apollo program. This is taken on Apollo 15. The astronauts were standing on Mount Hadley. That's the Falcon on the planet Hadley. And notice there's nothing, it's the only thing human in the picture, right? We sort of went to the moon and left it as became a wilderness, undeveloped, untouched by humans, a frontier, visited only briefly and tentatively. But it's safe to say that the Apollo expeditions to the lunar surface essentially redefined our entire understanding of the universe. Every discovery made in planetary science for the past 6 decades can trace itself directly or indirectly to the discoveries made on the moon, the field work, the samples that were brought back by the astronauts on the surface of the moon. We discovered that the interior structure of the moon is like the Earth. It has a crust, it has a mantle, it has a core. We discovered that the lunar maria, the seas, are all massive volcanic basalt provinces. We discovered that the moon probably formed in a giant impact of the primordial Earth. We discovered that unlike the Earth, the moon has no weather, liquid water, or plate tectonics, allowing rocks and landforms to survive for billions of years. And it is these ancient materials that will tell us about the processes that affected the first billion years of Earth's geologic history. We've heard a lot, and I really do mean a lot, about the hunt for life on other worlds, other planets in the solar system, other solar systems beyond our own. But the fact of the matter is we've only discovered life in one place, this planet. And that first billion years of solar system history, when small single-celled organisms decided to get off their butts and start evolving and get onto the land and take over this world, that's only preserved on the moon. The moon is lifeless, it has no indigenous fossils or organics, and the moon has resources which will enable its eventual settlement by human beings. We're in the midst of a lunar renaissance right now, starting with the Clementine mission in 1994, proceeding on to Lunar Prospector, the first discovery mission selected for as part of NASA's Discovery Program, to the European Smart 1, the Japanese Kaguya spacecraft, the Chinese Chang'e 1, Indian Chandrayaan-1, which had a US instrument on it with ASU participation in it, the L-CROSS, the Lunar Crater Remote Observation Sensing Satellite, which was the first direct observation of water at the lunar poles, our own Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spacecraft, which was launched in June of 2009. We're celebrating 11 years in lunar orbit, and an epic voyage of scientific discovery that's redefined our understanding of the moon, still ongoing. And we've had a series of Chinese missions, the Chinese Chang'e 2 mission, which was an orbiter, and their landers, the Chang'e 3, which was a rover, Chang'e 4, the first mission to the lunar far side, and Chang'e 5, the first mission to return samples from the moon, very important samples that will help us to understand key parts of the history of the moon, mission which I tried to fly as part of NASA's Discovery Program, successfully flying this year. So we've had a lot of interest in the moon internationally, and that's because the moon is close enough that you can feasibly attempt to send missions to it, but far enough away, it's quite challenging to send missions to it. It's a lot of international actors, which have not typically flown interplanetary missions, are flying missions to the moon on a fairly regular basis. So the next phase of lunar exploration will be an international endeavor, and the United States must occupy a position on the surface of the moon second to none. So let's talk a little bit about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. LRO was designed to acquire observations needed to support the future human return to the moon according to the original Vision for Space Exploration, the program announced by second President Bush in January 2004. Science and human exploration are synergistic and enable each other. LRO carries 7 science packages. The spacecraft was built and fabricated at the Goddard Space Flight Center. This is LRO at the facility at the Kennedy Space Center prior to launch, where it was being packaged and prepared for launch. So my instruments, the one I worked on with Professor Robinson here at ASU for so many years, are the narrow angle cameras, the NACs, and the WAC, the wide angle camera. NACs are 2 telescopes bolted onto the side of the spacecraft, and the WAC is a wide angle camera about the size of your fist that collects multi-spectral data of the surface of the moon. So, that's sort of what LRO looks like. Now, the big day was in June 18th, 2009. It launched literally at the last second, at the last launch window. And it's a good thing it did too, because we were not going to have another launch opportunity for 3 months because we had to accommodate the L-CROSS flight trajectories and astrodynamical constraints because we were co-launched on the same spacecraft. So it was a tremendous day. Rocket launches are always cool, but when it's your ship on the pointy end of the rocket, it means so much more. A lot of hard work and a lot of hard effort went into getting to this day and continuing as we fly it. This is kind of a very wordy slide, but just take my word for it. We've made a lot of discoveries with LRO about the just things no one had ever thought about before in the moon, things no one expected to find. We discovered the moon may still be volcanically active, just no one expected. We found new forms of volcanic landforms on the lunar surface. We found interesting subterranean caves, which would be great spots for send astronauts. Eventually, we found permanently shadowed regions which contain vast resources. We've also found definitively the composition and location of lunar pyroclastic deposits, which are fire fountaining eruptions, kind of like you see in the Big Island of Hawaii, but are also lunar ores that settlers will use at some point. Basic things about optical physics, planetary science, the cratering process. We've made a number of discoveries that are still ongoing. We have fuel for 7 more years of operations. We intend to. It is my fondest hope that LRO is still in orbit when the next American steps onto the surface of the moon are taken. Let's talk a little bit about the Artemis program. So Artemis sort of building off of all the follows, the interest to the moon never stopped. The Obama administration sort of said stopped all NASA lunar activities. The Trump administration decided to restart them. I was the day the Artemis program was announced by the vice president, which would have been in March 26, 2019. We are having a team meeting for the lunar lander. We had started looking at lunar landers. NASA's always looking at different concepts. So the lunar lander concept team, had a pre-planned meeting. We didn't know that the Space Council was going to have a meeting. We were having a pre-planned meeting of the entire lunar lander team at the Kennedy Space Center that morning. And I didn't really, was kind of surprised. No one was really expecting them to announce the Artemis program. It got kind of secret. I was in the hotel at Cocoa Beach. I was getting ready to go to the Cape, to the KSC. And I was in the elevator. Someone in the elevator notices my NASA pin on my lapel and goes, "Oh, what brings you to KSC?" And I'm like, "Well, we're having a big meeting to figure out how we're going to get Americans back to the lunar surface." And the guy goes, "Well, I'm just an air conditioner salesman from Chicago, but even I know how important this is to the country. So good luck. We're all depending on you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. No pressure." And then later that day, after Vice President Pence gave that speech and started us back to the moon, I felt the weight of history hitting me. That Mark Twain quote, there's two moments in a person's life: the moment when they're born and the moment when they find out why. And so I would say it is different this time. We've had a lot of Lucy in the football moments, but I think everyone involved is working as hard as they possibly can to finally get us beyond low Earth orbit for the first time in 5 decades. So to do that, we've engaged in a number of development programs. So the first, one of the most visible aspects of that is the Artemis Accords. You may have heard of them, but what we're basically trying to do is establish a framework for international participation on the lunar surface. We're signing bilateral agreements with international partners, very similar to what we did for the space station program, to govern activities on the lunar surface peacefully and ensure that norms and the rule of law are conveyed to the moon's surface as we start to explore it. Artemis Accords have been wildly successful. Countries all over the world have been signing up to join us on this lunar mission. Here's the plan as it sort of looks right now. I can't really talk about the HL, Human Landing System, the lander design, because of the ongoing litigation, but here's the sort of generic plan, where we'll have Artemis 1, which is presently stacking and getting ready for launch at the Cape. I will tell you about that in a few seconds. Then we'll have Artemis 2, which will be the first humans on board the Space Launch System to orbit the moon and rendezvous in deep space in the 21st century. And then we're going to launch this thing called the Gateway, which is a small space station in an interesting lunar orbit around the moon. And then in parallel to that, we're going to start doing surface activities. A really important one is this Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover, or VIPER. This is going to be our first United States rover, uncrewed rover ever launched to the moon. And its job will be to explore the lunar poles and find out how much resource potential is there. Can we use those volatile deposits that may be found at the lunar polar regions? Can we mine them and extract resources out of them? We're also going to have a series of commercial landers going to various spots on the moon, including the South Pole as preparation for sending humans there. And sometime around 2024, that's still our date, that's still what we're driving for. I still think we can do it. Somewhere, late 2024, we will have the first human mission to the moon in almost 6 decades. So it's a pretty exciting time as we get ready to do this. Later on, after that first mission, I will admit things get a little fuzzy, but we'll deploy various expanded capabilities to the surface. So our plan is what the SpaceX was given the contract award for earlier this year, was the first landing. And then NASA's intent right now is to have a second contract competition for follow-on landings that will take us to the end of the 2030s. And which should eventually result in the creation of a permanent lunar base at the polar region, South Pole of the moon. That's the current deployment. So featuring contributions from international partners, American companies, and continued buildup of this gateway thing in lunar orbit. You probably heard a lot about the spacesuit in the press. So right now we're working with industry to build spacesuits, modernized spacesuits for the Artemis program. So we don't actually, all the spacesuits you see in video of space station, they're all 40 years old. They were built for the shuttle program. We essentially put all the usable ones on the space station before the shuttle was retired from service. So we really need new spacesuits. So this is really exciting to watch that development effort happen. I work with the spacesuit team to help them understand the lunar environment. We're also developing this thing called the Lunar Terrain Vehicle, a new unpressurized lunar rover. So we don't, to achieve the science objectives and operational objectives and the exploration objectives and local resource objectives that we've set out for the Artemis program, we need mobility. Astronauts can't just walk everywhere. You need to have something to drive with. And so our plan is to have this lunar terrain vehicle that will eventually get deployed to the surface. Maybe with the first mission, we'll see how much budget, how expensive it winds up being. But at some point in the next 5 years, we'll have a lunar rover on the lunar surface that astronauts can use. Unlike the Apollo rover, the idea is that LTV should be able to be controlled from the ground. We'll also have a pressurized rover that will let the astronauts go really far away from the lunar base for advanced exploration. So the idea is that this, NASA may build it or international partners may build it. The idea is the astronauts live and work in here. It's kind of like an RV, and they can go many tens or even hundreds of kilometers away from the lunar base to explore and make great discoveries. I mentioned the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. This is a very unique program. This is not a typical NASA program. NASA's not specifying, NASA's not designing these vehicles. We're essentially buying them under contract. It's like a delivery fee. We say, well, NASA has payloads that we want to deliver to the moon. And then there's a pre-selected vendor pool, and they're all free to bid on it. And then the best vendor, or not the best, but the vendor who wins the award after a competitive evaluation gets selected to fly the mission. So there's been a number of these selections. I think there's 4 missions presently being planned in the pipeline to various destinations around the moon to start redeveloping the technology to land on the moon. The United States hasn't actually landed on the moon since the Apollo program. So in comparison to the Chinese, which have executed 4 successful landings and they're about to launch a 5th, we're actually quite far behind, which is not great. So we're hoping U.S. industry can help. The capabilities and ingenuity of American enterprise can help us make up that shortfall. Okay, so this is a video here that I hinted at earlier. There are good reasons why the South Pole of the moon have been targeted for the Artemis program. This is a computer animation showing the South Pole. This is Shackleton crater right here. This is Dager-Losh crater, and this spot right here, this whole rim. These are spots where the sun never stops shining because the moon is at a high obliquity relative to the sun. The sun angle tends to be around 1 degree or so, between 1 and 3 degrees. There are areas on the moon where the sun never shines. These craters right here, they're called permanently shadow craters. There's several of them. This is Shoemaker crater, named after the great Gene Shoemaker. This is Shackleton after the polar explorer. This is Dager-Losh. I have no idea who that is. But each of these craters could potentially contain millions of tons of water ice based on results from the LRO. So you have water ice. Water is hydrogen. Water is oxygen. It's rocket fuel. It's stuff you drink. It's stuff you breathe. The resources in the lunar poles could drive a generation of exploration and enable us to stay in the moon. It takes about 6 times the amount of fuel to get. For every pound of payload you get to the moon, it takes 6 times as much propellant to get it there. So if you can use the resources found on the lunar surface, it lets you have more capability. It lets you go farther. It lets you do more, and it lets you do more cheaply. Similarly, because there are areas where the sun never shines, there's also areas where the sun never stops shining. And that means that you could maybe, right here on the rim of Shackleton crater, here's another one, this peak of eternal light here on the rim of Dager-Losh crater. There are areas where, in theory, we could set up solar panels and have sunlight for about 97% of the year. The moon has a 14-day, as you're all probably painfully aware. You can see the moon's phases, the waning and waxing and the gibbous and the full moon and the new moon. So if you're towards the equator of the moon, you have that 14-day cycle. And designing batteries and systems to get through a 14-day lunar night is pretty tough from an engineering standpoint. But if you go to one of these areas of eternal light, you don't have to wait that long. The nighttime is only 2 or 3 days, somewhere between 4 and 7 days, which saves you a ton of money in batteries and power systems and lets you maybe delay when you put a nuclear power plant down on the surface. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide here. Okay, so what are we going to do on the moon? Well, among other things, we're going to do valuable lunar science. So we're going to understand the planetary processes. We're going to understand the ancient sun. We're going to understand the impact history of the Earth-Moon system. We're going to do fundamental lunar science, and we're going to understand volatile cycles. The moon is also a very interesting platform to study the universe, and I wanted to emphasize that point, especially to an astronomy club, is that even though most emphasis in the astronomy community now has been focusing on free space telescopes, like Hubble and Webb and LUVOIR and other concepts like that, once we have the capability to regularly access the lunar surface, once we're building up a McMurdo station at the moon, like the Artemis Space Camp, we'll have an amazing platform to study the universe. So you could take a 2 to 3 meter telescope like Hubble, land it on the moon using the SLS or the Human Launch Landing System, deploy it in a permanently shadowed crater, just let it run. And as the moon's natural sidereal motion will collect something equivalent to the wide field camera images from the Hubble Space Telescope. We'll be able to do radio astronomy in the radio quiet far side of the moon, which will be very interesting, help us understand the cosmic dawn, the 2 meter, or whatever it is, 2 centimeter hydrogen line. So there's lots of interesting things we can do from astrophysics on the moon, fundamental physics, things like combustion physics, chemistry, electrophoresis, the physical sciences and biology parts of the enterprise are really excited about the Artemis Base Camp and the capabilities it's going to have. So to do all this amazing science, we're going to have to do field geology. We're going to do the rover. We're going to be able to have to collect lots of new samples, return them to Earth, to the Johnson Space Center, the past, present, future home of all NASA astromaterials. We're going to have to access these cold, permanently shadowed cold traps. These are the coldest spots in the solar system. They have temperatures that are like 30 to 40 Kelvin. And so we're going to have to figure out how to operate in there with robots and humans. We're going to have to deploy long-lived surface instrumentation with telescopes. Okay, so we're also, to do that, we have a couple of components that are starting to come online. So you've heard a lot about budget delays, and I'm not going to make excuses for them. Most of them were decisions far above my pay grade. But I will say that most of these hardware components are actually coming close to being real. So the Orion spacecraft exists. It's at the Cape, ready for its first flight. So Orion has the spacecraft, which looks very much like Apollo, a blunt cone. And then the European provided service module, which is built by Airbus. And so that is Orion is already an international spacecraft. And here's Orion at the Cape. It's stacked and getting ready for flight on the Artemis 1 mission. Here's the launch escape system on the right. Here's Orion in the spacecraft checkout facility. So it's quite the thing when you see it. It looks like those old pictures of the Apollo, except it's happening right now at Cape Canaveral. The SLS, the first Space Launch System vehicle flight article, was just delivered to Cape Canaveral. It's already stacked and has been raised to vertical in the vehicle assembly building. And the integration is going pretty well. They've had some delays due to COVID. They had to shut down because of a couple of tropical storms, but they're still well on track for a December launch for the Artemis 1 mission. And here's the mobile launch tower being tested and going out to Launch Complex 39B. And they just did another exercise of what it's going to be like to recover the Orion capsule in the Gulf of Mexico. So the flight profile for Artemis 1 is pretty interesting. Here's a video that explains it. All right, so I'm not sure you guys could hear the audio, but basically you can see Artemis 1 will do a big figure 8 around the moon. So it'll be the first time we've done that with an uncrewed spacecraft in a very long time. Oops. I'll go to the next mission. Artemis 2 will be the first human mission. So that'll be an Apollo 8 style orbital mission to the vicinity of the moon. So it'll be a 4-person crew, international crew. I think the Canadians are going to get an astronaut to fly on that, I think. I'm not sure. And so it's going to be, that'll be pretty cool. Here's a picture of what the Orion looks like. It's bigger than Apollo, but it's still pretty cramped. And so one of the things I've been working with is I work with the engineers who design these displays, and we try to come up with ways to show science information. So it's kind of an interesting problem. How do you just concisely display information about the lunar environment astronauts are in on a sort of very concise way? So it's an interesting user interface problem. Okay, and Artemis 3 will be the first human landing on another world. So that's the main event. So what this is all building up to. I can hardly wait. I think it's going to be a very special moment. I think it's been so long since the first lunar landings that the 7th human lunar landing will be every bit as meaningful, almost as meaningful as Armstrong's first steps were, because it's passing into historical memory at this point. So a new generation will get to experience the thrill of having astronauts on another world. And this time, it won't be the dusty, grainy video. We're going to have high definition 4K live streams coming back from the moon. So, and then recently, of course, we had the selection of SpaceX as the provider for the first lander, and then it was promptly, litigated. And so I can't really say a whole lot about that, but at least nominally, that's sort of the plan at this point. And then, of course, while all that's going on, the Deep Space Gateway will be built up. That's a very small space station in lunar orbit. It's in an orbit called the Near Equilinear Halo orbit. The eventual idea is that it serves as a hub where you can see here lander vehicles will go back and forth from lunar surface to the gateway, and then people will go from the gateway back and forth to Earth. So it's kind of an interesting concept. It's not quite the O'Neill cylinders I was promised as a child, but it's an interesting first step towards deep space habitation. But the real main event and the real value to the taxpayer comes from the Artemis base camp. This will be like McMurdo Station on the moon. The United States has a very successful science program that would be impossible without the logistics and infrastructure applied by McMurdo Station on the Antarctic continent and Perry Station too. And so one of the things that we hope to achieve during the Artemis program is a permanent presence on the surface of the moon. And by permanent presence, I mean astronauts living there full time, at least not right away, but at least infrastructure that multiple actors, international partners, commercial entities can take advantage of to explore the moon. So that means we expect to have things extracting resources from resource deposits on the lunar surface, mining the moon. We expect to have a lunar rover. We expect to have spacesuits that are rugged enough to, withstand the harsh lunar environment. We expect to have a lunar terrain vehicle to move astronauts around. We expect to have a surface habitat or habitats and various power systems to sustain them for missions of up to 30 days or so by the end of the decade. So that'll be very exciting. Now, just to drive this point home, we hear a lot about Mars, but this Artemis base camp, which the United States is currently trying to build, will be our first permanent presence on another world. That is no small achievement. That'll be something every bit as meaningful to the history of the human species, to ourselves, and to our posterity as Orville and Wilbur's 12 Seconds in the Sand and Kitty Hawk. So this will be an epic moment in human history when those first astronauts go to the Artemis base camp to start operations. It will be a defining moment for the human species. And it will get us closer to all other destinations like Mars, long durations in zero gravity at the gateway, increasing the crew sizes that go down to the moon and explore, developing the techniques and tools to actually rove successfully over many years on the moon, increasing the range we can rove, developing fission, nuclear power, learning how to leverage in situ resources, understanding the effects of partial gravity on astronauts, and really developing autonomous robotic systems. You know, this is going to the moon and building that base camp there is how we're going to learn how to live and work on other worlds. And I really want to emphasize just how it's not just scientists, you know, everyone at NASA right now is working as hard as they can on this project, especially in human exploration. So it requires interns. You know, I had a team of interns this summer working for me. It's welders, technicians, construction people building launch pads, the flight controllers at JSC, people developing nutritious food for the astronauts, people engaged with social media, roboticists, graphics artists, geologists, spacesuit designers, astronauts, astronaut trainers. You know, it really is not, the astronauts get the most visibility, but you know, NASA has 18,000 employees and contractors in every state of the union that are working on this project. The moon enables scientific exploration. It's a cornerstone for solar system science and exoplanet studies. It's a training ground to learn how to conduct science exploration on a planetary surface, to really build a culture of exploration, to turn human spaceflight from just relatively limited expeditions to the International Space Station, and to convert the moon from a wilderness visited briefly and tentatively to a frontier of human opportunity. It's a natural laboratory, and it's an opportunity to explore and to build new capabilities and grow the American economy. If you've read the science definition team report that we wrote for the Artemis 3 mission last year, a lot of effort went into making it accessible. There's a lot of jargon in there, but there's several chapters were written to be very accessible. And I'm very fond of this sentence, not just because I wrote it, because I think it captures it very well. With this tremendous bounty of accessible resources, stunningly beautiful vistas, and compelling scientific questions, the moon beckons us towards the next horizon as the true gateway to the rest of the solar system. So with that, I will stop gabbing at you, and I'd be delighted to try to answer any questions you may have at this point.
Okay, any questions out there from the attendees? I have a question for you. Do we yet have a way to make actual fuel, rocket fuel, from water? I know we can separate hydrogen and oxygen, and we can certainly melt any frozen ice on the moon, but is it a practical process yet, or is that something that's really into development?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So as some of you may remember, in 1988, President George H.W. Bush stood on the steps of the National Air and Space Museum and said, we were going to have, go to the moon, this time to stay, and then go on to Mars. It's called the Space Exploration Initiative. It never really got off the ground, although, it's really interesting. If you talk to the folks who designed all the systems for SEI in the late 1980s, they all would have worked. I mean, SEI was a good faith, credible effort to move the United States beyond low Earth orbit. And so it gets a lot of criticism today for being very expensive, but it was an honest assessment of what NASA at the time, and with the benefit of all of the, most of the Apollo veterans were still around at that point. Folks like Chris Kraft and Gene Kranz. Well, I guess Gene's still around, but most of the veterans were still very active and still in management positions at NASA at that point. So during the SEI era, NASA and the Department of Defense actually developed a number of working prototypes to extract oxygen from lunar soils. There's actually 27 different ways of extracting oxygen from lunar soils. So, and that was before we knew the moon had volatiles or any sort of volatile species trapped in polar water, trapped in the lunar poles, though it had been suspected since the 70s that could be in the case. And in the late 1980s, we had working pilot prototypes, and they were actually, some of them were actually tested at lunar soils. Just small microgram amounts pulled from the Apollo collections. And that will never happen again, by the way. So SEI was canceled. More precisely, it did not survive into the Clinton administration. So most of that knowledge was lost. Then we had the Constellation program in 2004, and they had sort of gotten to a point where they were starting ready to build pilot plants, and then Constellation was canceled. So now we're at a point where NASA has adopted something called the leader-follower strategy. So we're betting on the volatiles because the LCROSS experiment found volatiles. So right now, as we speak, teams are testing various ways of extracting water from icy regoliths. So it is anticipated that the volatiles trapped at the moon will look a lot like permafrost in Siberia. That's probably the best analogy I can give you. So the thinking is you just heat it up, hydrogen escapes, and you have some sort of tanking and capturing. So it's essentially, it looks like a giant suction cup. I'm grotesquely oversimplifying the process, but that's kind of the principle at work here. You add heat to the system, which requires energy. So that's why that solar power that you find at the polar regions becomes important. You might actually need a fair amount of energy to extract all that water from the polar regions. So that's the hydrogen approach. The other approach is, like I said, there's 27 different ways of extracting oxygen from lunar soils. We had lunar base concepts in the 80s that totally closed. They would have been totally self-sufficient without the volatile deposits. The thing about lunar resources is they all require some sort of input. So some processes require carbon and power. Some resources require hydrogen and power. Some of the processes require multiple catalysts. One that works really well requires hydrogen fluoride. For those of you who know what HF is, it's one of the most deadly substances known to humanity, and it's instantly lethal. Just one drop of it is enough to kill most people. So the chances of actually launching that on a giant rocket, pretty low, but theoretically it could work. But what I'm trying to do is illustrate the conceptual difficulty of the problem. So what NASA has settled on is an approach called, there's two different approaches, but they basically involve adding hydrogen to the regolith and heating it up. And that approach has actually been tested on the Big Island of Hawaii. So we have working tabletop prototypes, and right now some of the first payloads that will get sent to the moon as part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program will probably be some of these various ISRU widgets. And so they're working on it. They're funding it. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of work that we'll have to go to scale up some of these smaller scale methods for extracting resources from the moon to something large enough to be commercially viable and actually produce large amounts of propellant and oxygen needed to sustain people on the surface. But at least you have a good chance of doing it. That what I just said is very closely tied to the level of money NASA or DoD is able to invest in nuclear power. We've been, again, during the Bush era, the first Bush, the Space Exploration Initiative, NASA was looking at kilowatt scale nuclear fission power plants for extraterrestrial applications on the moon and Mars. Sorry, megawatt scale. Sorry, I said kilowatt. I actually meant to say megawatt scale nuclear power plants for lunar and Martian applications. We're not looking at those right now. Those are, all of that knowledge, all that engineering expertise is long gone. So we're having to more or less start from scratch. So if we make investments in nuclear power, then yeah, it becomes a lot easier to contemplate ISRU schemes. But like I said, stay tuned on that one. I'm not sure that answers your question, but it does emphasize a lot of people are working on this, and we do have a strategy we're trying to implement.
Yeah, pretty much. You got close to it. Do you have a question from Marty Pazanka? Marty, if I pronounced your name wrong, I am sorry about that. Any plans to take a small telescope to the moon?
Yes.
That would be so cool.
Oh yeah. So absolutely. I am personally enthralled by the idea of doing astronomy from the moon. I'm not an astronomer, but I do attempt to advocate for that community as much as I can. And so there are definitely, if you read, it is definitely on the list of things we absolutely want to do. It's in the, there is a presently, I believe one is manifested for a mission to a far side location. So I think there's going to be at least a small radio telescope going to the far side. But yeah, no, there's no concrete plans right now, but there is a huge amount of interest, and it has been established as one of the objectives of the program. So as it is not the way NASA works is at least NASA Science, Science Mission Directorate, they're very much about competition. It's brutal. They don't usually they don't just pick their buddies to fly payloads. Basically, they always have competitive announcements of opportunity, and it's really ruthless. You have to submit proposals, which are just reviewed very closely, and the intent is, and I think the system works really well to make sure the taxpayers get the most value, to eliminate waste, and just make really sure that you get the most bang for your buck with these science payloads. So, I mean, as the PI of a discovery mission proposal, I can attest, the reviews you get back are pretty brutal. So you really do get the best of the best when you submit these mission instrument proposals. So, so without saying anything bad about the comments I got back for my proposal.
Yeah, I was thinking, wow, even a pair of binoculars would be really cool on the moon. He said,
oh, absolutely.
Thinking of bouncing off your, like, oh no, my helmet's in the way. I can't, my face mask, I can't get to my binoculars. Although there are so many launched telescopes and camera missions facing the moon, if you had one on, I mean, you wouldn't need to because it's counter to what you're trying to do with moon exploration. I mean, anymore cameras are so good that you could just could have one up there out of the Earth atmosphere, and you wouldn't need a telescope because your camera would be your telescope. I mean, magnification in the lens. I mean, who knows what that would be outside the atmosphere of Earth? But yeah, that I mean, it would be just so cool to have a telescope on Earth, on the moon, and just again bouncing your helmet off of it. It's like, I didn't think about that part.
Everyone is super excited about the idea, for sure. I mean, it's one of those things where I need to say this very I need to be very careful how I phrase this. NASA does not formally have a lunar lander yet because of the ongoing litigation involved with the HLS. So it is difficult it's hard to generate payloads for a lander you don't have yet.
Yeah.
And aren't even allowed to talk about.
Okay, there's another question or comment, I think, from Terry Shea. He fully supports the science on the moon, but humans being humans, as we move from exploration to exploration, is anything being done to preserve or protect the moon's environment? I mean, you crap out the Earth, so then you want to spend $1 billion going to another planet to save humanity, when if you just use that same money, you could save humanity on Earth, but then why would you?
Oh, yeah, that old canard. Okay, so I'll address that in a couple of different ways. So first and foremost, I recognize there's a range of opinions on this issue, right? Keep in mind the moon is a natural laboratory, right? So the moon, if you look at the moon with your telescopes, you can do planetary astronomy and look at it, you see all those craters. The moon has been absolutely pummeled by 4.5 billion years of planetary impacts. That's trillions of megatons of nuclear weapons. There is very little that humans can do to the moon that is worse than Mother Nature itself has already done to it. I mean, it's just hard to overemphasize that point, that the moon has just been absolutely pummeled. It's been hit and hit and hit again. In fact, during the lifetime of the LRO mission, we've recorded several hundred impacts of small meteors on the lunar surface. It's actually one of the most exciting discoveries we've made, is that the lunar impact rate is much higher than had been anticipated based on models alone. So, so the moon has been just pummeled by nature. So that said, it is a topic of interest because it's sort of interesting. The very act of landing on the moon could impact some of the science you want to do there. If these volatile species trapped in permanently shattered regions, which are very high priority from a resource, from an economic exploitation standpoint, scientists want to study those. They want to have them unimpacted. But there is essentially no way you can actually get to those deposits without impacting them. very active landing on the moon. We have no other way of getting there except with propulsive spacecraft. You're going to land on the moon with a ship that has a rocket. Those gases will eventually get to a PSR. So that's why the lunar rover is so important. That's why we want to try to do this. Even an uncrewed landing will potentially impact these PSR deposits. Now, the answer to that question is a couple different ways. You will try to minimize the impact. So that's one of the reasons why, the original thinking behind the program was you'd have a hydrolox, oxygen, hydrogen propellant, because some of those, if you've ever been to the Titan Missile Museum down in Tucson, those Titan rockets, they're pretty nasty propellants. The big cloud of death is what they called it when one of those things had an accident. Those hypergolic propellants are just nasty. They will kill a human in seconds. So the idea was if you use hydrolox, hydrogen and liquid oxygen as propellant, it burns to clean water. It's a quote unquote green propellant. It doesn't have any impact on the lunar surface. The second thing is that cosmochemists are smart. So when you have these rocket landings on the moon, you're talking about a very thin layer of volatiles on the order of microns. And when you dig deeper, you'll still get that record of the first billion years of volatiles throughout the history of the solar system. But it is an interesting, thing that, if you ever watch The Expanse, people look up at the moon and see just millions of people living on it, right? So if you take this to its logical extreme, you're, hundreds of years from now, you'll see people living and working on the moon. It's just a question of, what happens when that happens, or do you try to prevent that from happening, or do you try to just minimize the impacts of it? It's an interesting ethical question. I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer that. But I will say that from a planetary protection standpoint, we're taking active measures right now to ensure that nothing astronauts do on the surface will preclude scientific investigation. But that from an economic standpoint, if one of your goals of the program, one of the reasons why you're selling it to Congress is to create American jobs and grow a cislunar economy, try to create a new form of commerce between the Earth and the moon. You have to do some level of exploitation of lunar resources. So it's a very interesting ethical question you've raised, and it's far beyond my pay grade to address it. But hopefully, I've given you confidence. We're at least taking steps to ensure that the moon's environment is protected for the first few missions, and we can maximize the science return from those early missions before we start to really dig down into the resource potential.
Yeah,
I really doubt you'll see any lights on the moon from humans living on it in our lifetimes. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, did you put your hand up there? Unmute.
Mute.
There you
I'm
go.
wondering how much shielding would be necessary against cosmic rays. You see pictures of these guys wandering around on the surface. Don't they have to live in a really shielded environment?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, well asked, sir. So, the short answer is yes. And so most of the images you see in the NASA fancy renderings, shall we say, are Nancy and are what you used to call in the 80s artist concepts. So galactic cosmic rays are a huge threat to any efforts to move humanity or to conduct human missions beyond low Earth orbit. And the reason why is that Earth's magnetic field protects us from a lot of nasty stuff. So if you look at what an equivalent dose would be, so under normal circumstances, if there's no solar flares and there's GCRs, the equivalent dose by a crew on the lunar surface would be roughly half of what the crew of a U.S. nuclear submarine is allowed to have. So from a raw dosage standpoint, lunar operations are not so bad if everything happens. They're within the limits that we observed for people who work at nuclear power plants, who were, the crews of U.S. nuclear submarines, deterrent patrol, that sort of thing. It's within the limits that have been established by DOE for those kinds of people working in those fields.
We're coming
That's
out of
one aspect
solar
of it.
minimum now going into a solar maximum for a number of years, which happened to coincide with your launch. So
Right. So there was a solar event between Apollo 16 and 17 that would have resulted in the loss of the crew. So one of the things that we're very worried about right now is, in fact, how do you protect the crew on the surface? So we've actually made some advancements in radiation protection since the 1960s. So it turns out, if you've ever read the book, I fall into the camp of we never should have stopped the Apollo program. We should have kept going to Mars. However, built that lunar base in the 60s and just kept on going. So having said that, most of the spacecraft of that era would have been built from aluminum, and aluminum has spallation effects. And so a solar flare in an aluminum spacecraft will spallate the aluminum and can significantly increase the secondary radiation that the crew gets, possibly to a lethal level. So all of that said, if you look at some of the technologies we're developing now, like you see Kevlar is deployed throughout Orion to provide additional radiation shielding. We didn't have that technology back in the 60s. The Orion will have a storm shelter on it to protect the crew. Crews on the lunar surface for a 6.5-day mission, the HLS, the lander is going to have to provide protection. So there's a number of different ways of doing that, and to be very, again, here's where I have to point at the lawsuits. We can't talk about the HLS system. We're literally not allowed to talk to the contractors, and I can't even discuss what it is, or even what requirements were levied on the system because of the lawsuit. But it would be safe to assume that NASA is aware of that particular problem and is going to take steps to protect the astronauts on the surface. For crews at a lunar base, one of the things that you can do is that it turns out lunar soils, lunar regolith, is a great moderator of radiation. So if you can just take, it's very much like a World War I trench. You take the regolith, you pack it into bags, and you you pack it around your habitat, and that will protect you from a significant fraction of a solar flare. It turns it from just imminent lethality to a nuisance if you can get back to your storm shelter. I'm personally kind of worried about what happens to the folks on those rover missions. If they're on a rover and they're too far away from their base, it's a huge difference. Like if you have enough warning of a solar event, an optimum, best case, worst case scenario is you have like about 9 hours of warning. 9 hours is enough to get back. If you're only 20 or 30 kilometers away from your base with your storm shelter, boom, you just step on the gas, you go, you get back. If you don't have that level of warning, or you're so far away from your base, you have to hunker down. I mean, it's not practical to tell the astronauts, go dig a little trench, dive down in there, dive under your rover. So I will, I'm a geologist. I will just point out, just thinking logically about the problem, there are certain logical issues that I think we're going to have to work out as we start to contemplate epic voyages of discovery with a pressurized rover far away from the lunar base. Especially as Thomas has pointed out, as we go into the solar maximum period. We have an instrument on board LRO called the Crater, which has been studying the radiation environment around the moon for the last 11 years. So we have an enormous quantity of data about the radiation environment around the moon and what it will do to human bodies because of the Crater instrument. So I'm actually, I'm worried about, I personally think that it's a concern, and it is not my job in the NASA hierarchy to sort of fix the problem, but I personally am worried about it. And I know a lot of people are worried about it, and they're taking active steps to try to mitigate it right now. But my guess is I would bet on the regolith sandbags as being the best solution for the next decade or so of surface operation. So that's easy, it's convenient. You can take it back to the moon. I was reading in space.com, there's people talking about like Star Trek style deflector shields where you energize your own magnetic field to deflect the solar particles. Like, that would be cool. If you build a nuclear power plant, sure, let's go do it. I'm all in favor of the giant magnetic, self-produced magnetic field. Sure, let's do that. That sounds cool. But, you can achieve the same effect by filling a bag with dirt. My guess is the bag with dirt is going to win over the giant magnetic deflector shield. That's just my own perspective.
Worn out tires from the rovers filled with dirt, beer cans filled with dirt. Yeah, because I'm sure that, if you have guys going on the moon, there's going to be beer cans probably, but you never know.
I'm not even going to speculate about that.
Well, okay. Terry Shea's got another question.
Pete Conrad tried to get wine on Skylab 4, and man, he ignited a real firestorm with that one. So.
No creature comforts allowed.
Yeah, no creature comforts allowed. So I see in the chat there's a question here about, are there advantages to a mission to Mars with use the moon as a launch pad? So again, opinions vary on that. There are some people who are like, no, there's no advantage. However, a more correct perspective is that if you look at what it takes to get a crew to Mars, so there is no quote unquote official NASA plan for going to Mars. There's teams of people who've looked at this. There is a design reference mission for Mars activities that was put out in, I think it's 2009. So if you look at the last NASA design reference mission for Mars, it requires a lot of space launches. I mean, a lot of space launches. You're looking at 15 or 16 big rocket launches. You're looking at a lot of fuel. So the biggest thing you need to get a crew to Mars, if you're not going to go with nuclear propulsion, right? You could use a thing called nuclear thermal rocket and go to Mars. And this was looked at in the 60s. We built a prototype, everyone focuses on, we will land a person on the moon by the end of the decade. Before this decade is out, part of the Kennedy speech on May 5th, 1961. But in the last paragraph, he says, we're going to build a nuclear rocket and we're going to just to be ready to go, go to the moon to stay and go on to Mars. No one ever pays attention to that paragraph, but we actually built that nuclear rocket. It was called NERVA, and it was brought to flight prototype status and tested in Nevada. They had lit that thing off and they fired off a nuclear rocket in the middle of Nevada. And so if you use a nuclear rocket, you can get to Mars in 90 days. But if you have to use chemical propulsion, then you're looking at a transit time of around 9 to 12 months in deep space, total mission duration of about 3 years. To have the crew, to support a crew of 4 on the way to Mars requires about 2,000 pounds of food. It requires, I forget how much, several hundred tons of oxygen. It requires 700 tons of propellant using a hydrolox system. And if you just do simple math, you're looking at something like 70 rocket launches. So let's look at what happens if you go to the moon. If you aggregate the stuff you need to go to Mars at one of the Lagrange points, L1 or L2. L1 is my favorite. A lot of people say L2 would work. The halo orbit that the proposed Deep Space Gateway will be in is one of those sort of nice spots to aggregate things. If you extract the resources from the moon, it cuts that number of launches you need from Earth by like 70%. And it gets even better if you build a space elevator. So space elevators on Earth are really hard. They require graphite, weird, bizarro, carbon nanotubey, just real off the wall stuff that, that doesn't really exist yet. And it has to be like 26,000 kilometers long. And if that thing ever breaks and it starts snapping around the Earth as it spins, oh God, I don't even know what's going to happen then. On the moon, you can use density loss. So if you have this scenario where, we can use existing materials with the correct tensile strength to do a space elevator from the moon. So if you start extracting lunar resources and even start using a space elevator from the moon to pull that hydrogen off the lunar surface and get it into cislunar space somewhere, a Mars mission suddenly becomes a lot more feasible. It doesn't require, tens of dozens of rocket launches. And maybe with all the progress we've made in reusable launch vehicle technology in the last decade, maybe that's less of a concern. I don't know, but at least on paper, it looks pretty intimidating to require 100 launches to get to Mars, just to send a crew of 4 people there. That's a lot. And you're going to have to do it all over again for the next crew, right? So you're really going to do 100 launches every time you want to send people to Mars. So the fastest way to get to Mars is through the moon. If you have those lunar resources at your disposal, even asteroid resources too, if you can leverage asteroid and lunar resources to get that propellant ready for your Mars flight and aggregate in cislunar space, it becomes a lot cheaper. It becomes a lot faster. You will get there faster. You will have more capability when you do. And that's a lot of what's driving the Artemis program, is to give us that capability to go anywhere and do anything we want to do in the solar system. Because we don't want to just send astronauts to Mars. We want to send them to Ganymede, Ceres. I want to see Americans on Ceres. I want to see Americans on Ganymede. I'd like to be able to have that capability.
If we spend enough time on the moon, the learning curve from being on the moon, learning how to do these things that we must learn before we can get to Mars, like you're talking about this. The food question alone. A couple of years ago, I was at a talk given by one of the researchers just dealing with trying not to make the food bland and miserable and with all dehydrated food, because that's pretty much what you have to send, and coming up with recipes and asking people, hey, try some of these things, make recipes, send them to us, because can you imagine, even if you had a nuclear fueled rocket, 90 days of eating the same damn thing, by the time you got to Mars, you'd be killing and eating your cohabiting members merely to get the taste of the food out of your mouth.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big problem. So are clothes too, right? So right now, space station astronauts literally throw their clothes away. They wear each set of clothes for, I think it's don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 7 days. And then when they're done, they don't wash them. They stick them in the deorbiting supply ships, and they burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. So you can't do that on a Mars flight, right? You can't. Where are you going to stuff it in? That's really wasteful. You're talking about, talk about not employing best practices, right? That's just really wasteful.
It's
and
a guy
so,
thing. You mean, yeah, not changing clothes for 7 days. Most guys, when they're young, they do that all the time. When you get married, you find out, what do you mean? Wash that often? Yeah, I can see that. There's so many problems to overcome to get to Mars. But, there were just crazy amount of naysayers for going to the moon. And we did it 60 years ago. And it's just like, wow, we haven't progressed any further, really, other than with distant satellites and explorers and rovers and things, mechanical means for getting out to say Mars, and then getting the flybys of all these other planets. So yeah, it's going to take time, and I don't think it'll be in my lifetime to see a crew going to Mars. But even if the technology isn't there for developing a return vehicle that's of economical weight, and like you say, being able to launch from space is so much more cost effective, because the weight factor isn't a big deal, but carrying all that crap to say Mars, giving them an escape vehicle to get back, it's all logistics. It's all about science, and it's really fascinating. It's just like, wow, when you start thinking about it, it's like thinking about planets that may have life and then may have sentient life. And it's okay, what are the formulas? Well, you have to now use different formulas, because we figured out now that Io and Ganymede and some of these other moons actually may be more conducive to having certain types of life than we were thinking before. You had to be in the sweet spot. Well, they're out of the sweet spot, but because they're so close to massive planets and are warmed by gravitational what have you, that, oh wow, wait a second, they could, since they have water, have life. So Terry's got another question. Will governments claim territory on the moon, or are there agreements to share the moon?
That is a very interesting question. So there is a thing called the Outer Space Treaty, which prohibits territorial claims and military bases on other worlds. So it was signed at the height of the Cold War. There was concern at that point that the Russians were in a position to get to the moon first. Or sorry, I call them the Russian. That the Soviet Union could get to the moon before the United States. They certainly had the tech. In hindsight, they were not even close, and we didn't know that then. And they were still trying to get to the moon. So we signed the Outer Space Treaty, which, among other things, prohibits any territorial claims in other worlds. There are people who really like the Outer Space Treaty. There are people who really want to scrap the thing. I'm not going to cast judgments or values either one way or the other, but at least at the present time, that is the law of the land, and we are forbidden from making territorial claims in other worlds. I would say the Antarctic model is a good one for the moon. Antarctica is a continent for science. The United States neither recognizes nor makes territorial claims in other worlds, on Antarctica. The Antarctic Treaty has worked really well. It's created this amazing continent for science. It's preserved the resources and prevented the exploitation of resources on the Antarctic continent. So in that sense, it's worked really well and been a great framework. That model doesn't work. Maybe it might not work as well on the moon, because one of the reasons you're going is to extract resources, right? That's one of the impetus for this. There are companies who are really interested in mining lunar resources, and that's one of the reasons why Congress is funding money to go there. So it's one of the reasons why we get to go there and explore. So so that Antarctica total hands-off approach may not work, but at least at the present time, we do not intend, and nor will we make territorial claims on the moon. That's just us. I can't speak for other countries, right? So the best way to ensure that remains the case, that we have the peaceful uses of outer space, is to make sure the United States has a position on the lunar surface second to none. Because if we're there, the rule of law and international norms will be obeyed. If we're not, who can say what wacky things may happen?
So part of our first mission will have part of the Space Force troops up there.
So that's actually forbidden. So there will not, the Outer Space Treaty forbids so it's not actually forbidden. So the Outer Space Treaty, NASA astronauts are actually, many of them are serving members of the United States military, right? And the Space Force has astronauts who serve with NASA. What is forbidden by the Outer Space Treaty is military presence or weapons of mass destruction or weapons on other planets. You're not actually allowed to carry, weapons to the surface of like the moon or Mars. That would actually be forbidden. So like everything you saw on that show on Netflix would be like never happen in real life, right? Because it's essentially illegal. So like I said, you see a lot of stuff on TV. Not all of it is real, right? So you will see serving Space Force astronauts participate in NASA missions, which is a civilian agency going to the moon, but you probably won't see Space Force bases on the moon or something like that.
Until you find something up there that's like, wow, deposits of diamonds and platinum and all of those rare earth metals that we need so much for our cell phones. And well, actually, if you reinterpret the verbiage of that treaty, there's some wiggle worm because it's all open to interpretation. And
yeah, the treaty is actually pretty clear on the point. So
yeah, I know, but treaties unfortunately are only as good as the intentions of the people who signed them. So
as part of the Artemis Accords, we reaffirm, all these countries that signed the Artemis Accords reaffirm that they're going to obey the Outer Space Treaty, and also assert that will respect every, just work on a non-interference basis, not intentionally try to crash into other people's habitats or something, and work together to extract resources and stuff like that. So the Artemis Accords are a very interesting framework for how you build on the Outer Space Treaty to create peaceful collaboration between countries in a very positive way.
We hope that would be the case. Terry's got another comment, a little from the dark side. In the case of a death on the moon, what do you do with the body?
That is a very interesting question. I honestly, I don't know the answer. So during the Apollo program, they would have been left behind. I do not know what the Artemis policy will be. They have already established a search and rescue team looking at how to handle astronaut injuries and incapacitation on the surface. So we're already already working on that. I think if there's any remote possibility of bringing it back alive, we will. So even if a fatality on the moon, I don't know. It's hard to say. I really don't know. During Apollo, they would have been left.
I mean, I think if you were on the moon, it would be so fitting to be one of the first people buried on the moon. And now, granted, your family might want your remains back on Earth, but if I had something to say after I died, I'd be, no, let me be buried here because this is pretty cool. I died here. Just let me stay here. It's not as if I'm going to get lonely up here because I'm dead. But yeah, that's one of those philosophical. Well, would you want to be buried there or brought home? Yeah, or launched off to the sun or off into deep space, or yeah, there's too many parameters on that. Yeah, the weight of a dead body coming back. Well, we were going to bring him back anyway, weren't we? Well, yeah, but it's like, well, leave him outside where it's going to be cold. Put him in the shadows, so he'll stay frozen. You don't want him thawing, and because he is full of bacteria and he will necrote. So, any other questions from the attendees? I see that some people have dropped off, but this has been fascinating, and it's just something down the pike that it's going to happen eventually.
We are going. I mean, it feels. I was there for Constellation. That felt very different. Now the sense of urgency that I see every day, the people trying their hardest. It's inspiring. To be part of something larger than yourself and to see so many people working so hard to do something that frankly has taken far too long. So, I mean, I'm far more, let's put it this way, I am eager to get on with it so that we can actually start doing all this stuff we've been dreaming about for so long. It's time it's time, and we are going.
Another question from Terry: will there be webcams from the moon?
Oh, absolutely, there will. So the intent is to have as much video as we can. So I can't say we're still discussing it right now. Some of it depends on bandwidth. The moon is pretty far away. During Apollo, we were limited, obviously, by video, but by the end of the missions, we had pretty good. Essentially, we were broadcasting TV from the moon.
Yeah.
So we're going to have all kinds of data coming back, and it will be spectacular. Another interesting point I like to make is that the moon is a really good spot to observe the Earth. So I like to think about what astronauts who are living at the lunar base are going to see. They're going to go out, they're going to look up and see the whole spread of the Milky Way above them. And they'll look out and see our beautiful blue Earth. And the moon is a great platform for observing the Earth. And you can, among other things, you'll be able to see the carbon budget. You'll be able to track volcanic eruptions in real time. You'll be able to see weather instantly over the entire hemisphere of the Earth. It'll be pretty, I was kind of skeptical. I was like, what could you possibly get from lunar observations of Earth that you couldn't get from GEO? But the Earth observation community sat down and was like, well, you could do a bunch of really interesting things with just a couple of cameras pointed back at the Earth. So we'll definitely have that, and definitely is a strong word. It is likely we'll have that. We will absolutely have astronauts with GoPros and whatever the aerospace industry equivalent is, and cameras. This will not be like Apollo. You will see everything in real time, and it will be vivid, and it will be spectacular.
But then the question comes down to all of the science that's going on, space science especially, all of the remote stuff, all of the different NASA programs that want to get funded in this one's a major cost program. Just sending stuff to Mars is a major cost, but if it's just rovers, well, that's more doable. Let's send 2 rovers versus maybe part of your moon mission, because it's
there's priorities, right? Why aren't we curing cancer, right? Why aren't we doing? There's so many different things you could do, right? And it assumes there's a zero-sum game. So NASA's budget is admittedly a lot smaller than it is during Apollo. But if you look at what it's going to take to do Artemis, to really do this, first and foremost, as we've seen from the James Webb Space Telescope, uncrewed missions are not inexpensive, right? The Mars Curiosity Laboratory costs a significant amount of money. As we become more risk averse as a society, our tolerance for failure diminishes. So robotic missions are not exactly inexpensive. And as with any, the Apollo missions have sort of gone down in a very Ken Burnsy kind of way as this glorious endeavor that everyone in the country was behind. The actual polling from the era indicates quite the opposite. They essentially only happened for a variety of reasons, which I'm not really going to go into here, but they happened despite the fact that popular support for the Apollo program never really got higher than about 49%. And that was in July of 1969. And it cratered after that. And it's sort of, the average viewership, essentially when Al Bean pointed the camera at the sun on Apollo 12, it killed public interest in the program, essentially, because the TV ratings cratered after that and it never recovered for any of the subsequent lunar surface missions. Because, the viewership for the, 700 million people watched Armstrong's first step, like 600 million people watched Conrad get onto the surface, right? And then Bean, fries the camera. And Al Bean was a great guy. I mean, it was a total accident. This is not a criticism. It should not be construed as accidents happen. But Apollo did not have a huge amount of popular support. And we as a society have decided for the past 40 years that we're okay with spending a lot of money on the space shuttle, on the space station, on, that the level of funding that NASA gets right now to accomplish all the things that it's doing and doing very well. People are okay with that. So my theory is, as long as you can fit within that budget wedge, you're okay. And so I think that's my answer to you, is that we have proven over the past 50 years that, NASA's budget has basically remained pretty flat. And we've still managed to build a space station, build 5 space shuttles, and fly missions to all the planets in the solar system, and build amazing, great observatories in space, robust RNA programs. So we're doing okay. I'm always worried about the future, but I'm confident we can do all of this within the budget which we have, because we've done so much with what we've had already. And so I guess that's my kind of answer to you. The other thing is, what kind of world do you want? Do you want a world full of scarcity and decline? One where we're just content to be, the lesser of who cares? A world full of mediocrity? Or do you want to actually, do we want a better future? And everyone's version of a better future is different. But I think that question, and this is just me talking, I'm not spouting NASA talking points or anything here. The question of, can we extend human life to other worlds, is one of the defining questions of the 21st century. Because the solar system is big. It has enough resources to sustain trillions of humans. And if the United States if we just decide, yeah, that's it, we're done, we're gonna we'll let everyone else do the space thing, we're okay with that. That's a choice, right? That's a choice you make. That is a choice. To be a superpower or not is a choice. Other countries are doing this. They're going. India has a vibrant lunar exploration program. They're trying to launch their first humans into space. The Chinese have built their first space station. They've successfully landed on the moon 4 times. They announced last week that they're accelerating their lunar program to get humans onto the moon. Other countries, some of them are our allies, some of them are not. If we don't lead on this new frontier, then other countries, some may not necessarily share our values, will go. It's inevitable. It may happen 20 years from now, it may happen 50 years from now. But people will go into space. People will explore there. People will live there permanently. People will extract resources there. So this question of, can we, the United States, extend human life to other worlds, is a defining one for the 21st century. Will we have a future full of opportunity, of freedom, of respect for the rule of law? Because it's not just us going into space, it's our values going into space, right? So will American values be the thing that is, out there in the solar system, or will it be other less potentially respectful of human rights and individual liberty and the rule of law that will seize the momentum and seize the future? And I think for me, that's a really important point. I think I would hope, I want to predict the future. I would hope that as Americans, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, we can all agree that it would be good if America led the way on the new frontier, and in so doing, reap the benefits from doing so. Because others, if we don't, others absolutely will. And I think it would not be good if we weren't the leaders. That's just me, right? But I work for NASA and I've devoted my life to this, so my perspective is a little different.
I think NASA is one of the most technologically oriented and driving of industries, save maybe cell phones. But I think cell phones were an outcome of basically the NASA programs and communication needing to be improved, and all the things that have come about. I mean, if you just talk about Velcro, for God's sakes, just the technology that comes from all of the high-end technological programs, the space missions, where you have to determine, you have to make something smaller, not necessarily more economical, but if you're going to be doing something out in space, you've got to learn to do it, say, particularly this way. I think the NASA program for decades has always been the impetus, the synergism that gets so many things going, that has made America great in that aspect, because I think a lot of our technologies have come from that. One more question from Terry. Is the next gen Artemis being currently planned?
That is a great question. So the way I would answer it is this: we're going to the moon to stay. So the idea is, so we heard a lot about the Artemis generation. The idea is this is the generation that goes back to the moon this time to stay and then presses on to Mars. So I think you're seeing an integrated program here that's going to take decades to achieve in its full extent. But the general idea, as you saw from the chart I showed early on, is that you spend the 2020s building out in the moon, and in the 2030s you consolidate and get ready to press to Mars. And it's all baked in. It's part of an integrated plan. So what you describe as next gen Artemis is current gen Artemis, and it's the direction we're going. It's the program we're trying to implement. So we can sort of hang things, keep things together, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be an amazing adventure, and I'm just looking forward to sharing it with all of you. You're muted.
It had hidden my button with a comment that I was muted, so I couldn't get past the commented button. Anyway, yeah, I think that it's all fascinating coming up, and it's kind of like waiting for your next full eclipse, hoping, oh, it's going to be in Houston, I'm going to Houston. Oh, but I've got 2 more years, I can do this, and then waiting for the next Artemis launch, and then waiting a few more years for the crewed launch, and then waiting for the next stepping onto the moon. It's like, oh, this is going to be so cool. So yeah, old man like me just want to see it again. It's just the future of humanity is out there somewhere. We're crapping in our own mess kit here. So if we don't learn by our mistakes, we're going to have to venture out and crap out something else, which Terry was commenting about. It's like, yeah, we don't mind trashing things. God knows the geosynchronous orbit is almost trashed now with so much debris. It's like more getting past. Oh, we got past that. Oh, good. Now we're safely on the way to the moon. So,
well, I do have to run here soon, but I will say this: is that any industry that sprouts up off planet will have to be amazingly efficient. Like, you can't tolerate, like, you're not going to throw away your clothes, every pair of clothes on a flight to Mars, right? You can't. Every pound matters when you're on another planet. So I think it's my personal expectation is that it's going to really drive recycling technologies forward when you have to, when you actually have to go and strip, recycle your entire lander, because every part of that lander is valuable. It's going to really help, industries here that have to recycle and maintain high operational efficiencies. I think that things like in situ resource utilization, where you're extracting winter resources, you can't afford to have much waste when you need every pound of thing you're extracting. So I think in a very interesting kind of way, you're going to result in seeing large industrial, you're going to see industrial efficiencies in various industries that will be immediately useful to terrestrial industries and really cut down on pollution and things of that nature. It's one of those, it's not quite a spin-off, but I think it will be a best practices. And I think that having to adapt some of these industrial processes to the harsh environment of space will really help increase efficiency and cut down pollution here. So.
Yep. I must agree with you. We will not deter you any longer. We do appreciate you presenting. This has been fascinating. You've mentioned a lot of things I didn't know about the Artemis program, although I have the report on my computer. I haven't gotten that far through, and it's like, Jesus, criminy, there's a lot here. So I am looking forward to it. Clear skies, I guess, is what I wish for you and everybody working on that program, because we don't want any screw ups that poison the well, kind of like the Challenger or the Columbia and things like that really scarred people. It's kind of like one bad thing goes wrong in the war, and it's like, man, we need out of here now. And so yeah, we as Americans flip flop so quickly on our opinions about what is worthwhile and what isn't. But anyway, now I'm on my soapbox. So anyway, thank you once again. We do appreciate your presentation. We hope to hear from you again, maybe after one of the launches, and some more news about the progress of everything. We'll have you back. Thank you again very much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, our pleasure, totally. Well, I see that Rick and Paul have left the stage. I guess Old Man Bladders might have gotten to him. Shh, I didn't say that. But for the rest of y'all, we want to thank you for attending. Remember, coming up at the end of the year, November, our elections for president, vice president. Please, some of y'all volunteer. Also, please let us know what you think about having in-person meetings. We would like to know whether we should spend the money on getting GCU rooms or not, or holding off for a little while longer. So contact Rick or myself or any of the board members, by all means. Just let us know so we can get some sort of idea which path to take. So anyway, that being that, we will see you next month. And please, if you have anything you want to present, please do. We'd love to have you. Otherwise, here we go. Gaveling out. Y'all have a good weekend. Meeting's adjourned.